Hi everyone, my name is Essen and you are listening to the Brown History Podcast. If you ask someone what ancient India brought to the world, most people will probably say yoga. But for over 1,000 years, India was the center of knowledge, culture, and commerce. It was not just known for spices, elephants, and gems, but also for its advancements in astronomy, art, literature, language, religion, philosophy, and much more. So why don't people today know more about this part of India's history? On today's episode, we sit with the great historian William Dalrymple, author of his new book, The Golden Road, and discuss how ancient India shaped the world as we know today. This right here is an awesome episode, but before we get started, I gotta do this. I know it's annoying, but it's really important. If you want to support, if you want to help out, you know what? No, you have to support this. You have to help out. Platforms like this don't come often. It requires help. It requires support. Become a Patreon, become a subscriber to the newsletter, check out the merch shop. So many ways to help out. Your help goes a long way, and I can't do this without you. All right? Okay. Anyways, that was a bit too much. That was a bit extra, but I just had my coffee and it's kicking in. So, let's do this. I'm with the great William Dalrymple. That dude loves what he does, and it was honestly a delight to talk to him. So, enough chit chat, enough yaddy yaddy. Let's go. Here we go. Okay, so I read the book. The whole book makes this really strong case about ancient India once being the intellectual, spiritual, cultural, everything center of the world. Can you make that case here right now for all our listeners?
Sure. Very happily. How long have we got, first of all?
We got all day.
All day. Good.
All day.
I'm ready to go for it. It's a big fat book. Are we on visuals, or is this just recorded?
No, it's just recorded.
I'm waving. I should say then that I'm waving my copy of my book in a very sales promotionally way around.
A beautiful book. A beautiful book with beautiful pictures. It has a ribbon bookmark too.
It has a ribbon, and and there's a fancy Barnes and Noble special edition that has a sort of painted end papers, which I will maybe take to my coffin with me eventually and have placed over my breast. I'm very pleased.
It'll aesthetically look good on your bookshelf. It'll make you look smart. That's for sure. It'll make you look smart.
So yes, I would be very happy to make this case. So the first thing to say is that I think this is quite a contested territory. I don't need to tell anyone on Brown history this, because it is an area which non-South Asians know nothing about. Mm-hmm. No one outside South Asia has heard of great Indian mathematicians like Brahmagupta or Aryabhatta, despite the fact that they came up with zero and created our number system. We are not taught their names at school. We don't know about them. But the reverse has happened, particularly in India, where it's become the playground of the sort of nationalist fantasy land. And WhatsApp Uncle forwards would have you believe that India not only came up with zero, which it unquestionably did, and our number system, which it unquestionably did, but also, helicopters in the Ramayana and nuclear weapons at Kurukshetra in the Mahabharata. And what I've tried to do in this book is to make the case that ancient India is this extraordinary force that we don't know about, but without plunging down, in a sense, a nationalist sort of nonsense rabbit hole whereby the whole thing is sort of massively exaggerated and obscured. Because you don't need to. It's quite extraordinary enough, the verifiable facts. And because this book sets out into what is a contested landscape, a quarter of it is footnotes. And all the academic arguments which do rage over all this stuff are laid out in the footnotes. So if you are a scholar and want to get into the nitty gritty, there's plenty of high fiber for you at the back of the book. But I've tried to keep the main narrative front of the book readable and accessible for an ordinary intelligent reader. So it's a book in two halves. It's the sweet stuff of the deep fry at the beginning, and the high fiber in the back. And the contention of this book is that India is one of those parts of the globe, and we should say straight up, by India, I'm defining it as ancient India was defined as early as the Mahabharata as the area bounded on the west by the Indus, on the east by the Ganges, to the north by the Himalayas, and to the south by the sea.
And what's the timeline?
And the timeline is about 250 BCE, time of Ashoka, through to the 12th century, to the beginning of the Delhi Sultanate,
Okay.
or even the first Mongol raids, a little bit after the foundation of the Delhi Sultanate. And in that time frame, an extraordinary package of Indian ideas roll out both east and westwards from India. The most important, probably in terms of spread, is Buddhism, which is obviously an Indian religion. We'll talk about more about this in a second. But born on the banks of the Ganges, the Buddha's born just over the Nepalese border from UP in Lumbini, receives his enlightenment in Bihar, in Bodh Gaya, and preaches his first sermon outside Varanasi at Sarnath. So that set of ideas spreads out astonishingly to Pakistan, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, through Lhasa to China, Mongolia, and Siberia, through Burma and Sri Lanka, to Southeast Asia, to Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, even as far as the Philippines. And this is the greatest achievement of Indian soft power ever. You're never, ever going to have Indian ideas or ideas from that geographical area reach a further spread than happens at that point. Then, a few hundred years later, in the 5th and 6th century, you get a second wave of Indian influence, which is associated with Hindu kingship, the Sanskrit language, and Hinduism, and the great epics like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And that is sort of a 500 or 600 year process, beginning about 500 AD and ending again, I suppose, climaxing with the building of Angkor Wat in the 12th century. And during that period, Sanskrit is the language of diplomacy and culture over a vast swathe of Asia, from Kandahar all the way to Bali. And not just, any old Sanskrit, but high formal Sanskrit. One of the amazing things about the inscriptions in Southeast Asia is that they're orthographically and grammatically perfect. There's no sort of sense that this is sort of pidgin Sanskrit being spoken by a bunch of hicks, on the banks of the Mekong.
Yeah.
This is, some of the most poetic and perfect
Sophisticated.
Sanskrit ever written. Yeah, sophisticated is exactly the word. And then the third package of ideas, which ends the book, is the Indian number systems, zero, the ideas of algorithms and algebra, which originate with Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta in India, spread to Baghdad, are refined and made infinitely more accessible by the translations and reworkings of Al-Khwarizmi, then spread right across the Arab and Islamic world, where eventually they're taught to a kid from Pisa, whose father runs a trading station in what's now Algeria, Bujaya. He goes back to Italy, where he finds his friends are still doing sort of MCV, CCM, all that Latin numeral stuff.
Right.
And luckily for us, that kid is Fibonacci. Fibonacci writes this genius book called the Liber Abaci, which again is basically Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta in Latin. And he makes no bones about this. He calls it the modus Indorum. He's very clear that this is the Indian method of counting. And it includes this revolutionary idea still in Europe in the 12th century that you can express any number up to infinity in just 9 numerals and 0. So that is, I'd say, India's greatest gift to the world. Forget Yoga Day and all that kind of stuff. This is the nearest thing the human race has to universal language, and it starts in Pataliputra. It's refined in Mount Abu, where Brahmagupta lives, and Ujjain. And it takes 600 years to reach Europe, but it transforms Europe. So that's the contention of this book, that there is a whole range of stuff, totally transformative for both Asia and for Europe, which we just don't know in the West. No one brought up every kid.
Why don't we know in the West?
Well, this is classic Brown history material. This is where we pull in your old friend Macaulay, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my question. Okay, but it's a two-part question, right? I mean, there's the West. I guess we can say racism, we can say colonialism, but what about Southeast Asia? What about Asia? What about all these countries? You would think that they would care a lot more. If a Muslim would go to Mecca, reveres Mecca, Christians would, revere Bethlehem, and Buddhism being an Indian religion I would assume that people across that side of the world would look at India as like a holy land or maybe even like a
Yeah.
historically holy land. Why isn't that the case?
So there's several answers to that. Okay, so let's do the colonial thing
Let's
first.
do the
Let's get that
West.
out of the way to the west. So as listeners and readers of Brown history know very well, there is several phases actually to the British project in India. And you get a phase in the 18th century when people like William Jones and so on are very excited, and my forebear James Prinsep are very excited about Indic cultures and big it up. But you then are followed by this monstrous phase in the mid 19th century when Macaulay and his friends, Colebrook, the guy who supports Macaulay in that minute of education, his brother-in-law is the guy that, incidentally, who supervises the Great Famine in Ireland later in his career, and who thinks that it's better that the Irish starve than that they are given relief. It's extraordinary. It's some of the worst moments of British colonialism, and it's all the same characters. Anyway, Macaulay comes up with this idea that there is a single shelf of a good English library is worth the entire native literature of India and Arabia. And you see this sort of Trumpian moment when, following that, Bentinck, the Governor General, withdraws the government funding for Sanskrit, for publishing and translating of Indic texts. And Macaulay actually calls, Prinsep is busy producing, translations of Shakuntala and the Cloud Messenger and Kalidasa and all this stuff. And Macaulay says we should not be spending government money on pornography. So it's very much the same sort of tone as, sort of Trump trying to get rid of NPR
Or anything.
or anything. So these guys, the West knows everything. That is a big deal, and that survives in our educational system. And everyone in North America grows up knowing about Archimedes in his bath shouting "Eureka" from the age of 7.
Yeah.
But not a single person has ever been taught in the West about Aryabhatta or Brahmagupta. Aryabhatta, just to put it down there, comes up with the exact circumference of the Earth, the exact distance of the Earth to the Moon, the fact that the Earth is heliocentric, that it revolves around the Sun 1,000 years before Galileo. Brahmagupta, his successor, comes up with 0, the Indian number system, and turns 0 from a placeholder into a number with its own power, a number with its own qualities. So he produces, I think, 36 definitions of 0, one of which is, for example, that 0 is the number you get when you take a number from itself. And by defining it, he allows you to do place value, tens, thousands, hundreds, tens of thousands, all the rest of it. And he sets up the number system effectively, which we all use today. If you're looking at this on a laptop, it's there in front of you on your screen. If you're looking at it on a phone, it's there on your phone too. We use it every day. We call it in the West Arabic numbers because we got it from the Arabs. But the Arabs get it from the Indians. And exactly how is an extraordinary story that I tell at the end of this book, which is one of my favorite bits of the book. And I had great fun researching.
We can get to that after because you still have to finish the rest of the question, which is why doesn't the other side of the world, East Asia, Southeast Asia, care so much?
So, well, if they're Buddhists, they do. And you find hundreds of Buddhists coming to Bodh Gaya every year to do their darshan of the great temple there and to pray at the place under the banyan tree where the Buddha was enlightened and so on. But I think the pitch has been slightly queered in academia certainly, by the overstating of this case by Hindu nationalist historians in the 1930s. Hindu nationalist historians like M.C. Majumdar wrote books with titles like Hindu Colonies in Southeast Asia that made it look as if the Khmer Empire, Sri Vijaya, these extraordinary empires that used Sanskrit and built the biggest Hindu temples ever built, were Indian colonies, run in the same way from India as the French were then running Indochine. Now, we now know that is complete nonsense. There were occasional raids by the Cholas on the coast of Southeast Asia, but there was never a mass conquest of Southeast Asia by Indian military forces. Instead, what is more remarkable is that these ideas spread as an empire of the spirit rather than an empire of the sword. No army forced anyone to learn 0 or Sanskrit. people chose to adopt it because it was regarded as the essence of sophistication and brilliance, which is amazing. And in world history, there are not so many of those empires which spread by sheer dint of their sophistication. Normally in history, change takes place because someone marches in and tells people what to do. So I think the nationalism of the 30s has meant that in academia there's a great tussle going on over the word Indianization, which is not a word I use in the book and I've kept away from because it is a minefield. But what happened is very clear. What you get is Indian ideas being adopted by their own choice by the people of Southeast Asia, and they adapt the ideas. It's not like they just copy them from India. So Southeast Asian Hinduism, for example, it sounds rather fun. I rather like. So there's no caste. They drink beer and eat pork. They have women Brahmins. It's much less patriarchal than Indian Hinduism. While the buildings and the sculptures, while heavily influenced by Indian precedents, are their own things. So and the person who gets this and expresses it perfectly and sort of, does all the work that you need to understand this in a single sentence is Tagore, who visits Angkor Wat in 1920 and writes this beautiful sentence. He says, "Everywhere I could see India, yet I could not recognize her."
Wow.
And that's it. That's it in one sentence. You got it. It's Indian ideas. I mean, the metaphor I use is it's like Indian seeds planted in foreign soils producing strange new blooms.
Wow.
Because it's not the imposition of Indian ideas at the point of a sword. It's not colonialism. Angkor Wat doesn't look like any Indian temple. All the forms have their roots in Indian ideas, but it's different. And just to emphasize that, the central tower of Angkor Wat is in the shape of that nice word, a quincunx, which is the shape of a 5 on a dice. And the central tower of that 5 is the home of the ashes of the king Suryavarman II who built it. Now, you never get that in a Hindu temple. The ashes of kings are outside the temple on the ghats, and they have their cenotaphs on the rivers or outside the town if it's in an inland area. But in Angkor Wat, it is in the center of the thing. So it's a different form of Hinduism, and you see that today when you go to Bali. The Bali Hinduism is largely aniconic. There is often there's no representation of the deities. They use these lovely sort of things that look a bit like English straw dollies made out of palm, these sort of religious creations to express their gods. So it's a very interesting field, and one, as I say, which is heavily contested, but which is very exciting to visit, and it shows you in a sense the infinite possibilities of this world.
Did ancient India at the time know that it was the center of the world? They didn't know at the time. At least the politicians and the ruling elites, did they know?
So, important thing to say right up the front is that ancient India is never united politically.
True. Yes. The different
so you
kingdoms.
have this area. You have to somehow balance in your head the fact that there's a very clearly defined area that's called India.
Yeah.
From the time of the Mahabharata, and no one doubts that India is a unit, and the definition of it is quite clear. But you have to balance that with the fact that it's never a nation state. It's a collection, a mandala of different polities. So when Xuanzang, the Chinese monk, turns up over the Himalayas in the 630s, is it? 640s, he says, "I'm entering India at Jalalabad, now in Afghanistan, just above the Khyber Pass. I'm entering India, a land of 70 kingdoms."
Wow.
So again, we have
Wild.
to balance both those things
Yeah.
in our heads.
All right, so let me rephrase my question then. Did the different kingdoms in India have an idea that they were the center of the world culturally, intellectually, spiritually? And did they recognize this as a soft power? Did they use this for their goals and ends?
So you certainly have Jambudvipa, as many of the sources call what we would call the South Indian subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent, South Asia. That's always placed at the center of things. And in maps, you have, I suppose, Mount Meru at the very center, which Mount Meru is in modern Tibet. But India is nonetheless at the center of things, like you'd imagine. But I don't think Indians are so aware of the impact they have, certainly in the surviving sources. I'm trying to think of whether we have any inscriptions that lay this out exactly. But what you do have is the foreigners coming in, recognizing India as the central things. Now, I'll just quote the opening line of my book, The Golden Road, which quotes Xuanzang. And he says, people of distant places with diverse customs generally designate the land they most admire as India. So he recognized it. So this is this guy who's from the very heartland of Chinese high culture. His grandfather was the rector of Beijing, not Beijing, Shanghai University. And he's absolutely the center of the learned world in China. And where's he's hero worshipping India. He thinks India is where it's at. And all the good ideas come from there. So you have, and then you have, we haven't talked yet about Nalanda, the great Buddhist university.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that.
At the heart of it. But Nalanda has a copper plate now in the National Museum in Delhi, where the king of Indonesia, Srivijaya, which is a long way from India, gives a benefaction of 100 villages in perpetuity to the university to provide food and money to support a Southeast Asian college at Nalanda. So you have the king of, it's rather like, I don't know, the Saudis paying for a business school in Oxford, or the Mahindas paying for the cultural center in Harvard. You have the king of a distant kingdom giving an enormous sum of money to the University of Nalanda, the Mahavihara, the great monastery of Nalanda, so that Southeast Asians can have an expatriate college on the edge of the campus and dive into this incredible learning.
Wow. We did not talk. You mentioned the title of your book, The Golden Road. We didn't talk about that. So
this is we're getting
all
very
over the
excited. We're
place.
diving all
Yeah.
over the place, but yeah.
The question, that's the
I hope
answer.
we will come.
Yeah, I think we're okay. I think people are understanding it.
Good.
We're
So
not
yeah,
too far off.
there's two phrases which I use in this book. One, and both the coinages that I hope will stick. As an author, you want to create phrases that become popular. One is the Golden Road, which is the idea that there were maritime routes that linked India, both east and west. So in the Roman period, India was the largest trading partner of the Roman Empire. Rome had no idea where China was. People bang on about the Silk Road. The Silk Road did not exist in the classical period. If it existed ever, it existed after the Mongols smash a hole through Asia in the 13th century, linking the Mediterranean and the South China Sea. So Marco Polo can, in 1271, go all the way to Kublai Khan's pleasure dome. But in the early period, the Romans had no idea China existed. China had no idea, beyond a few rumors, that Rome existed. And yet Pliny, the Roman sea captain, is complaining that India is the sink of all the precious metals in the world. So in a rather sort of Trumpian cry, he's moaning that all the gold that Rome is saved up is being spent by liberals in Rome and promiscuous women on sort of porno outfit silk, which he thinks is this sort of unacceptably lascivious see-through material, which only the most degenerate woman would wear. No good Roman woman would be seen dead in a silk sari, says Pliny. And he then harumphs about how everyone's spending money. The young today are spending money on pepper, which he regards as a sort of woke spice, as a sort of that only hipsters would dream of putting on their food. So Pliny is this sort of very recognizable sort of conservative military figure, and he regards India as the enemy, as the liberals in Rome. In his view, he's sitting in some sort of naval base in Naples, and the liberals in Rome are spending all the hard-earned gold of the Roman Empire buying porno silk and woke pepper, as well as ivory, as well as gems and diamonds. And there is this sort of clear view that in Rome that India is the source of all the world's great luxuries. So we have this figure called Lolina Polina, who's a mistress of Nero. And she, in a rather sort of Punjabi way, turns up at parties in Rome with glittering Indian diamonds on her hair,
Wow.
garnets all over her breasts, pearls in her belly, and God knows what on her feet. Um, and she carries the receipts to parties so that people can see how much they cost. So Pliny's horrified by all this, and he regards India as the sink of all the precious metals in the world. So the Golden Road is the maritime routes that connect India with both East and West. And my contention in this book is that we've been looking in the wrong place. It's not the Silk Road and China in the early period. It's India and the maritime routes, the Golden
You
Road.
you pretty much say the Silk Road is bullshit.
I'd say that the Silk Road is bullshit before the 13th century. Yeah,
Okay. Why do you
yeah.
say this is bullshit? Because there are countless books. I mean, I think it's the
There are
only
countless
road.
books.
I think it's the only road people know about when it comes to that kind of stuff. The Silk Road.
It's a very, very interesting thing. It's a good example of how groupthink. You know how in life enough people subscribe to an idea and it becomes a fact.
Yeah.
We could come up with ideas from politics, which we probably shouldn't air publicly, which is the examples of that. Anyway, my argument in this book is that the Silk Road is one of those. Everyone, I think, today assumes that the Silk Road is an unquestionable geopolitical fact, that it's always been there. It's in the classical sources. Marco Polo mentions it. Bullshit. The idea was invented in 1877 by a German geographer called Baron von Richthofen, whose grandson, I don't know whether you ever studied the Red Baron in your... So British
Never.
schoolboys of my generation used to know all about the Red Baron, who was this flying ace in World War II. Anyway, his granddad came up with this idea called the Seidenstrassen, its original called, the Silk Road, which was a colonial railway line that he was planning between Berlin and Chang'an. No, to Berlin and Beijing at that stage, Peking as it would then have been called. And it first enters the English language with a Nazi sympathizing Swede called Sven Hedin, whose book is called The Silk Roads, 1936, first time it ever appears in English. And it becomes a popular idea with a series of exhibitions at the Met and the National Gallery of Art in Washington in the 1980s when I'm at university. And first of all, you get sort of, Silk Road carpet shops and Silk Road bars and Silk Road this and that in Istanbul and Tashkent and where have you.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, by the time your generation pop up, I'm speaking now as Uncle G here, as an unquestioned geopolitical fact, and the Chinese build the Belt and Road on top of it, but it's just not there in the sources. Marco Polo never mentions the Silk Road. No Chinese source mentions the Silk Road. No classical Roman or Greek source mentions the Silk Road. And I'm very happy to believe that it's a very important thing from the Mongol conquest onwards. But you cannot name a single Roman trader or diplomatic mission who ever went to China, nor a Chinese mission or diplomatic party or sailor who went from China to Rome. But we know from, for example, Strabo, who's a geographer based in Alexandria, he takes the new governor of Egypt on a tour of Egypt in the 1st century, and he arrives at the Red Sea coast to see hundreds of vessels, 250 vessels gathering, he says, at the port of Myos Hormuz, which wasn't even the biggest port. And they are waiting for the monsoon winds to change so that the fleet can sail to India. So it isn't just one pioneering Marco Polo figure heading off to India. It's annual fleets of 250 vessels plus, maybe from each port, maybe 500 vessels a year, passing from the Roman Red Sea ports, Berenike and Myos Hormuz, and landing in Sindh at Barbaricum, which is more or less modern Karachi at the mouth of the Indus, Barigaza, which is Bharuch in modern Gujarat, which was the main port of the Gangetic Plain to the west, and biggest of all, Muziris in what's now Kerala, which was the place where everyone bought their pepper and their exotic spices. So these 3 ports are in all Roman accounts, and the more detailed accounts, for the 1st century, we have a kind of Lonely Planet style guide to the commerce of the Red Sea, and it's got a complicated name, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, but it's basically, rough guide to India. And it's very clear. It lays out 20 ports and what you can buy and sell in each. So the Romans intimately knew India, and yet somehow we've picked up this idea that all east-west traffic came by this very romantic idea, the Silk Road. Camel caravans, Bactrian camels swaying over the Pamirs, padding through the sands of the Taklamakan and all this shit. It never happened. There was never a direct route from China to Rome or from Rome to China. But there was the maritime route. And the central idea that you have to take in, and then it all becomes clear, is think for a minute of Tibet, way above South Asia.
Yeah.
This enormous expanse. It's very big if you look on the map of Tibet. Now, every winter, that freezes and cold winds rake into the Tibetan plateau. About now, late April, it begins to thaw and warm winds blow out from Tibet. Now, that creates the wind system that creates the monsoon winds. And it means that South Asian winds, uncharacteristically, are very well behaved and punctual, and that they, unlike my Scottish winds, which blow in all directions, all over the place, Indian winds blow in a very organised fashion, one direction outwards for 6 months of the year, and then they turn, and for 6 months they blow back in again. It's literally that simple, which means that India has a natural advantage on almost everywhere else, in that you've only got to put up a sail, west coast or east coast. And once you've learnt, like a professional surfer, like a surfer in Hawaii can learn to master the biggest waves, so Indian sailors from about 200 BCE are known to have mastered the massive monsoon winds, those incredible meteorological earthquakes that each year crack over our shores. And once you've got the sails and the boats that can cope with that, you are turbocharged, and you can get from Kerala to Egypt in 2 months.
Wow.
You then have a few months to see the pyramids, see a show in Alexandria, sell your goods, go and visit the delights of Alexandria. And then you've got to be back on the Red Sea coast by July and get on your boat, and then you catch the counterwinds. If you miss it, you miss it, and you have to wait a whole year in Egypt.
Wow.
But these winds blow backwards and forwards with great regularity. It's only now that we're fucking up those, excuse my language, we're fucking up those trade currents, and the monsoons are all over the place at the moment, and often late. And what used to be, monsoons were over in Delhi when I first moved there by September. Now it's still raining into October.
Climate change.
Climate change has changed that, absolute reliable climate pattern. Which,
It struck me that when you were talking about the Golden Road, and you're talking about this like vast network of ships and trade going back and forth, and these ports that are just busy. But in my lifetime, I don't remember hearing much about India's shipbuilding or maritime engineering. I don't remember watching any Bollywood movies with ships and boats. So clearly, sea trade was such a big part of the Golden Road. How advanced or not advanced was Indian shipbuilding at the time, and was really...
It was totally state of the art, and Indians knew that. You were asking whether Indians were aware that they were the center of the world. I'm not sure the answer to that question. What I do know is that Indians are very proud of their boats, and a lot of the Indian dynasties, such as the Satavahanas, have them on their coins. They're so proud that, we are these guys that build these fancy ships. And you have them in the Ajanta caves. You have these pictures of these enormous three-masted,
right,
international vessels. Now, I'm going to irritate you by saying that one of the reasons that you didn't grow up with big Indian shipping as part of your conception is the end of the Raj. Now, I spent my entire career, let me just put this out, being extremely rude about the East India Company. But one of the things that the British Empire did do was it created a trading world, which was destroyed in 1947.
It created a separate trading world away from the Golden Road.
This is now moving forward into the 19th century.
Right.
One of the few big positives for India that came out of being part of the Raj was that you had imperial trading systems that would allow, for example, Gujaratis to settle in Tanzania and Kenya and bits of East Africa, or for the Chettiars from Tamil Nadu, the money lending caste of and merchant caste of South India, to settle in Burma and Singapore. So you had this huge expatriate world of Indian sailors that reached its peak under the Raj, where with an Indian Empire passport, you could move to Aden, you could move to Tanzania, you could move to Kenya, or on the East Coast, you could move to Burma or Singapore or Hong Kong, which is why you had massive Parsi communities in Hong Kong. You had massive Chettiar communities in Burma who owned a lot of the real estate until 1947. And that world is a world that's utterly destroyed in 1947 because the old trade barriers come up as soon as you get the nation states replacing.
Right.
So in no way to deny the massive destruction that the British Empire did to a million different things in India, it did create one upside, which was this trading system that allowed Indians to trade out. So that's the reason you get those massive Guju communities in East Africa or Chettiar communities in Southeast Asia, is that was something that was one of the economic positives, one of the few economic positives of the Raj, and that ends in 1947. So India, in the 75 years since the end of the Raj, has not had the big shipping world that was there during the Raj, but also, and this is a very important point, was there throughout most of, I suppose, modern history, that you've always had Gujus trading with East Africa. When Vasco da Gama turns up in Mombasa, it's a Guju pilot who takes him to India. And so so India, so to answer your question briefly, yes, India was a massive naval force and merchant navy force throughout the whole of history, but it ends in 1947 to some extent.
What about the centrality of ancient India? When does that start to fade away?
So that's obviously, again, of the various minefields, that's one of the most heavily contested. But you get the peak of Indian influence running for 1,000 years, no short time.
So a long time.
250 BC from the age of Ashoka right through the Gupta period, right through the rise of the Rajput clans, and it's reaching its peak really by the 9th, 10th, 11th century. Now, there's two things that brings it to a close. One is the invasions of the Delhi Sultanate, the Turkic forces coming down from Ghazni and from Kandahar and so on. And that's just something that, of course, that every Indian nationalist knows, and now is almost the most central fact in Indian history for some people. But it's true. A lot of destruction took place, and we can't deny it. It's there in the sources. It's very clear. And you go around Madhya Pradesh and you see a lot of destroyed temples. So a lot of violence took place at that period. But there's a second wave which does as much, which Indian nationalists don't know, and in fact we all forget. And that's the Mongols. The Mongols erupt out of Mongolia in particularly the 12th century and 13th century. And what happens is that the Khaljis, who are then in charge in Delhi, successfully fend them off. So there is a hostile border now at the north of the Punjab, and the old trade routes into Afghanistan are now cut off. And instead of the old trade routes emanating from India, you get at that stage the Silk Road, which opens up between the Mediterranean and the South China Sea.
Right.
Then, equally important, in that massive destruction of the Mongol horde, tens of thousands of refugees pour out of destroyed Afghan city-states like Merv, Balkh, and they end up, these Persian speakers, living in Delhi. And this is the period in which the Sanskrit ceases to be the international language of commerce and diplomacy, and Persian takes its place. So Indian history is like a three-layered sandwich, if you like. You've got this thick bottom layer of Sanskrit.
Yeah.
You then have 700 years when Persian is the language, even in the Hindu courts in the south. So, for example, Shivaji's father speaks Persian and writes his diplomatic correspondence in Persian. And then in the 18th century, English takes its place. Now, you can look at that obviously in two different ways. There are those who would regard that as a hugely disruptive and 1,000 years of slavery, as Modi calls it. But you could look at it differently, as I do, as, in a sense, the source of South Asia's cultural richness. It means you have not only that amazing Sanskrit stuff, you get all that amazing Mughal stuff. And then you get the English language on top. So Indians are, if they're well educated, part of three different worlds, culturally aligned in three different directions. If you know your Sanskrit and are familiar with the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, if you are aware of this extraordinary Islamic heritage with resulted in the Taj Mahal and some of the most beautiful manuscripts and paintings, the way that the poetry of Hafiz and so on come to India, and then there's a whole world of Indian Islamic poetry on top of that, such as Amir Khusro and the later Mughal poets. And then you get the Anglicizing period when figures like Tagore emerge, and ultimately Rushdie, Arundhati Roy, Vikram Chandra, and all the rest of them. So, in a sense, you have a choice of how you look at this. You can see your glass half full, or you can see it half empty.
Yeah. Do you, you live in India. You spent a lot of time in India. I
spent 9 months a year there. Yeah,
I think you live there practically.
I live there. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've lived there 40 years. I've lived there all my adult life. Yeah.
Do you fear? This is like a side question, but do you feel like the government kind of coming down on you, and you get like a bit scared what you're saying or you're not? Because I've had guests on my podcast, and they will want to say something, and they'll say it, and then they'll be like, you know what? I need to travel to India next year. I can't, can you cut this out because they'll take away my invitation or my card, whatever.
That's a very real thing now.
Yeah.
And you absolutely can't deny it. And if you read the papers, for example, this week, the Mughals and the Sultanate's been taken out of the Indian textbooks now.
I didn't know that.
There is all sorts of stuff at work. For myself, my Mughal books were very popular in India, but didn't go down particularly well with this government. I have to say they've liked this book very much. I haven't done this as a to seek favor from these guys. I think it's genuinely interesting and fascinating stuff. But I was sent, for example, a friend in the British Embassy in Moscow was sent this book by the Indian ambassador. The official channels are giving this out, and good on them. I mean, this is part of Indian history, and there is a perception within India that anyone that studies the Mughal period is either a Muslim or a Marxist, and it's associated with Irfan Habib and that sort of generation of Indian left-wing commentators. There's equally a prejudice that anyone who studies the ancient period is sort of potentially an RSS prachatnik and is a sort of Muslim baiting, and anyone that likes the ancient period is pro-Hindu and anti-Muslim. So I've realized that when I went from writing 4 books on Mughal and colonial history to writing about ancient history, that I was slightly sort of crossing a hostile frontier. And there are those who I've seen on Twitter saying, "Oh, he's gone over to Hindutva," or this sort of stuff. But I'm an outsider, and I don't feel I need to. I'm born in Scotland.
Yeah,
I don't feel I need to support one team or the other. I can enjoy the Taj Mahal. I can enjoy Vijayanagara. They're both extraordinary things. And when I first went to India aged 18, I've never left. It was both those things that amaze me, and to me that's the full richness of Indian civilization, that you have these different layers, that you have these amazing ancient caves in Ajanta, these amazing ancient caves in Ellora, but you also have astonishing Mughal monuments, and they're all absolutely extraordinary monuments. And as a historian, I have the freedom and pleasure and enormous enjoyment. I mean, it's what's kept me going all these years, despite the power cuts and the pollution and everything, is that to just feast on this incredible cultural richness.
What about your safety and the safety of your family? Are you ever scared and worried and you're like, you know what, maybe I should not write this part down?
No, I think one should be aware that this is an authoritarian government, but not exaggerate it. I mean, if I was a Kashmiri living in Delhi, my life would be more circumscribed than it is as a white guy, and that should be said
Right,
straight up.
right, right.
But for most people, if you're not directly taking on the government on a professional basis and an activist, it's still a wonderful place to live. And I'm very grateful to India for supporting me. It's not necessarily, it shouldn't. There's no given world where someone from the former colonial power can live in a country that was brutalized for
Yeah.
500 years.
It's
There's no reason that
glass half
people would
full.
accept you. Yeah, and but yet, I'm at the end of 40 years of living there. I have most of my friends in the world are there. My interests are there, and no, I have to say the Indian state has been for me very accommodating. I've never had any trouble getting my visas. There've been a few moments when I've sailed slightly close to the wind politically, but in general, I'm very grateful to India, both the people and the government, for putting up with me all this time. And I've generally, honestly been able to speak my truth as I want to. I don't feel that I'm living in a police state where I can't say what I think. I do say what I think. My Twitter feed is very frank.
All right.
I would be lying if I said I didn't pull my punches a little bit, particularly on sensitive issues like Kashmir.
Yeah.
But by
That
and
was my next
large,
question.
yeah. No, I won't deny it. It's true. I'm a foreigner. I need a visa,
Yeah,
so
and
I
Kashmir is
can't.
a very sensitive issue.
Yeah, and if I was to turn myself into an activist, I think I would definitely be um, undermining my invitation. Um, but I'm a historian. I'm not an activist,
Right.
and I've been given full access to documents about the Mughal period. There's been no sense in which I haven't been able to access these things. I've been able to operate and write for 40 years, really with terrific freedom in a way that would not be possible. I mean, for example, look at the way that the Israeli government is stopping people getting into the Israeli archives
Yeah.
to study the Nakba or something, and no one that tweets in favor of Palestine is allowed in. I've been
You've been pretty outspoken about
I've been pretty
Palestine.
outspoken,
And there are, and when I
and
was
I've never
researching
had
you,
my
there are a lot of pro-Israeli articles about you. Not very nice.
I've spent a lot of, I mean, one of the other bits of my career was writing about the Middle East,
Yeah.
and there have been points in my career when I could easily have imagined moving to the Middle East and writing Middle Eastern, particularly Ottoman history. And one of the books I'm most proud of is my book on the Middle Eastern Christian minorities from the Holy Mountain. And in the course of that, I was in the West Bank, staying in Palestinian villages, researching and interviewing people in the settlements. And you can't unsee what you see there. It is in the West Bank, unquestionably an apartheid system. There are, the one road for the Palestinians with blue number plates. There's another road for Israelis, which are yellow number plates. Palestinians have to wear IDs and pass through checkpoints. Israelis don't. And so when I read the news from Gaza and from and the West Bank, this is something I do feel very strongly about.
Okay. I props to you. Respect. Let's go back to the book. Speaking of Israel and colonialism, I think one of the things that the book punches the narrative, or maybe get people a bit confused, is that when you colonize a people, usually you have this idea that they're less than you. And they're either savages or barbaric or backwards, whatever. But here you have this ancient India backstory that you say has spread all around the world. The British who are coming in, they must have, did they not have, an idea that this was a full out civilization of intellect ideas, of intelligent that's vast, influential, and now they're coming in and they're lying to themselves that these people are savages, or how does this work?
So how this works is that there are phases of colonialism, like there are different periods of Mughal history. The history of Akbar is very different from the history of Aurangzeb. In the same way, in a sense, the first generation of British scholars to go to India, the period of William Jones in the 1760s, 70s, and 80s, is the period when suddenly the Brits realize what they've stumbled on. Initially the Brits coming to India were very mercantile, and they were very much focused on making money, which they did very successfully, particularly for the textile trade. But suddenly in the 1780s, when there is the William Pitt's India Act, and the government the government takes a 50% share of the East India Company, bails it out from it. The East India Company goes bankrupt in 1772, and the government bails it out, and you suddenly have British government institutions arriving in India in the 1770s. And at that point, among those who arrives is Sir William Jones. And he is a judge in the colonial system, but he is someone who he's a great linguist. He already speaks all the kind of classical languages of the West, and Persian and Arabic, and he now learns Sanskrit. And he discovers Kalidasa, he discovers the Cloud Messenger, he discovers Shakuntala. And there are these gorgeous letters written from his era about how Sanskrit is a language more copious than Greek, more perfect than Latin. How now the heroes of the Iliad and the Odyssey look to me as mere cartoons compared to the glories of the Pandava brothers. And then there's other characters like my own forebear, James Prinsep, who is the guy who rediscovers or translates the Ashoka Brahmi and the Kharoshthi scripts, rediscovers the existence of Ashoka and Kanishka. And these guys are, terrific enthusiasts for India, and they fight with the new wave of Macaulay and Colebrook and these guys who say that Indian poetry is just pornography, that Indian civilization is worthless. And there are these big public debates. So I think it's very important to realize that, it's very easy to say, just take the sort of black and white attitude. Like in modern India, there are liberals as well as the Modi government, and they are engaged in continuous debate. So in the British period, you have people like Jones and Prinsep, who are enormous supporters of Indian learning, fighting with the likes of Macaulay and Colebrook, who are the Trumpians, if you like, wanting to promote only their own national vision. And in the 1740s, the Macaulayans win that battle, particularly with the rise of evangelicals. And this coincides with the period when the British are triumphant in India. They're now militarily when they arrived, they always had to be careful not to fall out with everybody individually. They might be able to fight one ruler at a time if they were lucky. But by the 1850s, they are the premier military power in South Asia. And they don't have to worry so much. And just as we saw America become much more arrogant in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet system and the rise, the era of the Bushes, and this idea after 9/11 that we can just give liberal democracy to the whole world and our system is the right system, and we've defeated the communists, we must defeat the Islamists now.
Yeah.
There's that moment in British India in the 1850s when they think that everything that's British is absolutely on top, and everything else must give way to that. So there's a history to these things. There are different phases, and the suppressing and the minimizing of Indian achievement takes place during the 1850s. Interestingly, one of the things I'm still researching, I haven't come to a final answer for, is when we talked earlier about how Indian numbers are this extraordinary Indian invention, which are the numbers we use today. Now, when Al-Khwarizmi translates Brahmagupta and Aryabhatta, he calls that the system of Hindu calculation.
Right.
When Fibonacci translates this again into Latin, he still calls it the modus indorum, the Indian method. What I don't understand is when suddenly Western Europe started calling these Arabic numbers and forgets that these are from India, because initially they know it,
Hmm.
and they you know, there's a whole range of Western sources that say the greatest mathematicians in the world are the Indians. They were mathematicians of great subtlety and brilliance. But that's lost today. And it's somehow been forgotten. And I suspect it's the same period. It's the 1850s when suddenly Indian numbers become Arabic numbers, and the genius of ancient India is forgotten. Incidentally, in the Arab world, the number system is still called Hindi numbers.
That's crazy. That's so cool.
Look at your face. I can see there's a but coming.
Your book says a lot of positive things, but I was wondering, what about the darker aspects of Indian society at that time? Did that spread across the world? We're talking about maybe caste, labor exploitation, the treatment of women. I don't know.
No, it didn't spread, interestingly. And one of we talked about how earlier about how
Caste.
how the form of Hinduism that takes root in Southeast Asia has no caste,
Yeah.
is not patriarchal. They get women Brahmins, which you never get in temples in India. And seems to be a lot of beer drinking and pork eating.
Okay.
So I'm very much set for a nice Southeast Asian form of Hinduism. That sounds to be just up my particular alley. But as a man who likes his beer and pork, but no. These aspects of Hinduism do not spread, and it's very
Not
interesting.
not Hinduism, but just I don't want to put in Hinduism on the spot here. I'm just saying in India in general,
Well,
society.
remember that Buddhism is also doesn't have caste to the same
Right.
extent,
But
and
how does Buddhism spread? I mean, I would assume that this trade is, money, profit, business. I don't think that's a place where Buddhism could, be preserved and then be spread across the other side of the world.
on the contrary. So this is one of the interesting surprises for me, certainly when I was researching this, is that you're right. We think of Buddhism as this very otherworldly religion, and in Hollywood, Buddhist monks are sort of shorthand for sort of mysticism.
Yeah.
Often in Marvel movies, they're often sort of
Zero possessions.
floating off the floating up into levitating and possessing vajras that are like kind of laser beams or whatever. In reality, Buddhism was spread by Indian merchants, and the monks and the merchants were in symbiosis. So, from the very beginning, it is merchants who embrace Buddhism. Buddhist monks are early Buddhist monasteries have slaves.
Wow.
Interesting. Not early, but by the middle phase, when Buddhist monasteries were their most powerful, they're often on mineral deposits. For example, the biggest Buddhist monastery in Afghanistan is a place called Mezainak, which is about to be wrecked by a Chinese mining company because it sits on top of the biggest mineral deposit, the biggest copper deposit in Central Asia. When I was in Malaysia in the autumn, another early Buddhist site is on the biggest iron ore deposit in that area. And the Buddhist monks lent money. We have inscriptions, for example, there's one particularly good inscription in Andhra Pradesh that lays it all out. It's by a guy, it's a long inscription. He says, "My dad was a rice farmer, but thanks to the loans from this Buddhist monastery, I was able to become a Mahanavika. A Mahanavika means a great sailor.
Wow. So Buddhist monasteries were
Bags,
like banks, consulting firms.
correct,
Wow.
correct. And the women nuns produce cotton. We have
Yeah.
records in the Deccan of big cotton production coming out of Buddhist monasteries. And no, it's a very interesting capitalist world. And the monasteries are often caravanserais for traders on these routes. So as Buddhist monasteries spread up the trade routes, merchants are staying in them. Some scholars believe that the gorgeous frescoes that you get in Ajanta which are often dealing with quite saucy palace scenes rather than just monks praying and meditating. some scholars believe that they were there to attract patrons, rich patrons, being invited into this magnificent hall in the hope that they'll donate to the monasteries. So no, the early Buddhist monasteries, no doubt, were great centers of spirituality and learning, but they were also rooted in this world with a very realist approach to keeping the whole enterprise afloat.
Wow, that's gonna shock a lot of people. Last question for real this time. What about today? Do you think India has a chance to reclaim that kind of cultural and intellectual centrality again?
I don't know. It's the question I leave hanging at the end of the book.
Yeah.
Um, I am a great optimist for India economically.
Okay.
India just overtook Britain to become the fifth economic power in the world. In the next decade, unless there's some sort of catastrophe or some unforeseen cataclysm, India will overtake both Germany and Japan to become the third economic power in the world. The only question is where will it be by the end of the century? Will it be one, two, or three? Will it be? I mean, Trump seems to be doing a pretty good job destroying the American economy
Yeah.
at the moment, and it could be any of the three. You could imagine a world where India was on top. You could imagine a world where America was on top, and you could
Yeah.
certainly imagine a world where China is going to be on top. Any of those three are possible. But whether India has another cultural renaissance is an open question. And I think one of the things that I'm very struck by when I study ancient India is what an open world it was. It was a world where they imported ideas as well as exported them. So there are references, for example, to the Yavana Sutras, which are we don't know what they were, but Euclid, Ptolemy, Archimedes, some Greek mathematical texts. When you go to Ajanta, you see these pictures of Romans, Egyptians,
Yeah.
Ethiopians. There are frequent depictions of Ethiopians on ancient Buddhist sculpture. So this was a rich world where people were coming in and people were exchanging ideas, and India was learning from outside. For example, there's various moments in the second and third century when new ideas of horoscopy and various Hellenistic ideas of the zodiac are imported into India. India is not resistant to new ideas. It's not a hermetically sealed, nationalistic,
Yeah.
policed frontier. And I think that if India does keep that openness and humility and openness to outside ideas, there's every reason to believe that a benign government with the economic resources that India will undoubtedly have could promote education, could build spectacular museums, could see great renaissances of letters. Whether that will happen remains to be seen,
And
and I hope it does.
that's a good way. That's a good spot to leave this episode. End this episode. All right. Thank you so much. This was such an honor. It's so
Not at all.
surreal.
Great pleasure for me. I'm a big fan.
No, please don't. You're like the Michael Jordan here of history, and I'm playing basketball. I'm trying to play basketball with someone like you. So
It's
it's
been
a
a great pleasure
it's
to
a
chat.
great honor to talk to you, and I hope we can keep in touch. And hopefully, I can't wait for your next book, and we can keep doing this.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
Good
much.
to meet you.
You too. Take care. Bye bye.